Hello and good evening. I'm Melisa Idris, and you're watching The Future is Female. This is the show where we find the extraordinary in every woman. In the age of fast fashion and mass production, the value of artisanship has become vastly underappreciated, and craft legacies are at risk. Our region, Southeast Asia, is brimming with craftsmanship and artisan heritage, but many small, local, boutique brands are struggling to get the recognition they deserve or even to make a living competing with fast fashion. Now, the dream of preserving heritage crafts for generations to come was precisely why Dia Guild was founded, a platform where Southeast Asian labels and craft could be introduced to and appreciated by a global audience. One of the co-founders of Dia Guild joins us today, Aisha Hassan. Aisha, thank you so much for joining me on the show. It's lovely to chat to you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Aisha, so you and two others, Alia Farouk and Kylie Francis, founded Dia. And I want to talk a little bit about coming to that decision. I read a statement in which you had stated, if I may quote, "We aim to change the narrative around Southeast Asia, which has long been associated with cheap labor and mass-produced products." And I really like that. I like the idea of you wanting to change the narrative. But maybe you can tell us a little bit about that history, how, what started this conversation, this whole ball rolling.
Sure. So Alia, Kylie, and I are all friends from Malaysia. We're all Malaysian born and bred, but we've been lucky enough to sort of study and work abroad. And when we did, we often had people say, "Oh my God, I love that. Where did you get that from?" And they're from these Southeast Asian labels back home. But, compared to the rise of Japanese labels or South Korean labels, brands from our region were relatively unknown. And so we wanted to figure out, why is this? And we kind of did this in two ways. One was we sent out a survey to all our friends saying, "Hey, what do you think when we say Southeast Asia?" And overwhelmingly, the answer was cheap products and labor exploitation. And then we realized that, one of the reasons for this is because so much of fast fashion has been produced here, but that has led to this sort of association. And that's not really fair, because we have incredible craftsmanship from this region. We have designers who are doing amazing things. And so we thought, okay, this is our mission, this is our home. We are going to take Southeast Asia global because it's about time, quite frankly. And then that's when we started ideating around Dia. And so we started speaking to the designers themselves and saying, "What do you need?" And based on their answers, that's kind of how we built the platform.
And what were some of the answers, if you don't mind me asking?
No, of course. So we realized that there were three main reasons. So one was that they underinvested in digital marketing. And as we know, in this day and age, social media, digital media in general is the king. So they weren't really able to compete on that digital stage. Another reason is that because of a lack of exposure to global markets, sometimes these brands weren't able to sort of convey their narrative or their story as effectively, right? And of course, for some regional designers, language limitations played a role as well. And then the third reason is that these brands and artisans were just underserved by existing platforms today. You think of your Shopee, you think of your Lazada. These are platforms that, they're great for what they are, but they focus on scale. And what that means is that brand value is diluted. So that didn't really work for them.
Okay, that's really good. And let's come back to some of those things that they didn't invest in and how Dia kind of bridges that gap. But I do want to commend you on the name Dia. I think that's so wonderful. Dia being a genderless Malay word. Could you tell me how you came up with that, or how the three of you decided on that?
Sure, absolutely. So the truth is, I'm actually a fiction writer as well, and I was writing a character named Dia. And then when we started talking about it, we were like, "Oh, this is such an homage to our Malaysian roots. It's such a common word in our language." And then Kylie pointed out that as an acronym, it also stands for directly impacting artisans. And then me and Alia were like, "Whoa, that's totally what it is." And then diving deeper into the etymology of the word, as a prefix, dia means to connect or going through or between. So you think about words like dialogue, diameter. And it kind of really spoke to our mission of bridging the gap, right, between Southeast Asian artisanship and this sort of discerning global audience who would actually appreciate it.
That's really wonderful. It really does pay homage to our language and our heritage. I want to ask you about that, kind of telling that story, because part of Dia's ethos is not just kind of showcasing crafts or craftsmanship or artisanship, but also telling the story. The ethos is to give context and credit. Can we talk a little bit about why it's so important for you to have this ethos of cultural appreciation?
Sure. I think to open up that argument, it's worth sort of acknowledging that the term cultural appropriation has become a buzzword in recent times,
Right.
right? We see it.
Everybody understands how to say cultural appropriation, but kind of flipping it to cultural appreciation is slightly different. It caught me off guard, I have to say, when I read it.
Yeah, exactly. And cultural appropriation these days has been reduced to an argument about what to wear or what not to wear. But what cultural appropriation really is, it's about the erasure of sort of minority cultures or heritage, right? When we take things out of their context. And for us, we see that in Southeast Asian craft, especially, or even, Asian fashion generally, when you see cheongsams and kimonos reproduced overseas, or you see batik taken over without any sort of reference to where it's from. It's so important for us to share the context and credit because these things are really the core of these items. These objects have a life beyond just their aesthetic value, which is unfortunately what cultural appropriation does. So for us, cultural appreciation is saying like, hey, these things have an entire culture behind them. And this entire culture is sort of emblematic of an entire people and history and lives. And so we really want to bring back that depth to the things that we buy and we choose to own, right? I think in today's consumer culture, it's very easy to go down a more is more, or I'm doing this for the gram or the way it looks. But context and credit is really saying like, look, some of these things are born out of amazing histories and we want to tell you all about it.
I really like that also, because sometimes I think so much of the way we purchase things is emotionless, it's mindless, barely think about it, which is the heart of fast fashion: quick and easy and instant gratification, right? But by telling the story behind a certain item of clothing or an accessory, there becomes an emotional connection. You become emotionally connected to a piece, and that it makes it all the more, I guess, significant of a purchase. Maybe you can tell me a little bit about that part of Dia, because it's not just a platform not just a catalog of items. There's a story that's being told, and this is what you touched on a bit earlier about the narrative that needs to be conveyed.
Yeah, so the way we try and sort of bring that story on our platform is that anything that's on our platform, for example, a bag, a piece of clothing, it doesn't exist in isolation. So for every brand that we feature, every brand has their own profile that lives on the site. And this profile is born out of an interview we do with them where we really talk about their lives. We say, what made you start this brand? Sometimes the stories are incredibly personal, incredibly tragic at times, but these are artisans who have then sort of channeled these experiences into craft. So that's one way we do it. We try and connect you to the real person behind the small business. And then another way we do it is that on every product page, when you go on our website, diaguild.com, you click on something and we have a section called Artisans Notes. And, we really get our brands to tell us what inspired you, how long did it take to make? And we try to put all that information there. So you don't see just a bag. What you see is a bag made by a mother who lives in Malaysia because she really loves vintage kimono fabrics and she sews them on her own at home, right? Something like that.
One of the things I like about buying kind of heritage products is sometimes they put the name of the artisan on it, but you've taken it one step further by telling us the story behind this artisan. Maybe you can share one of your favorite artisan stories. Do you have one that's lingered with you after all this time?
Yeah, gosh, so many to choose from. Oh my goodness. One brand that has always struck accord with me, and I love all our brands really. But is a Cambodian-based brand called Garden of Desire. So Garden of Desire is a jewelry brand, um, and they really focus on traditional silversmithing. So all their items are sort of exquisitely handmade by artisans in Siem Reap, and they often incorporate motifs that were prominent in ancient Angkor, for example, or that are inspired by the natural topography of Cambodia. So that in itself is kind of riveting. But then you find out that the founder of the brand, his name is Lai Pisith, he actually started this brand because he lost his family during the Khmer Rouge regime and he had to flee as a refugee. And only many decades later, he came back and he told us that this brand was his way of creating a thing of beauty in a country that had taken everything from him, and yet he went home and he worked through the silversmiths also because during the Khmer Rouge regime and the economic crisis that followed, silversmithing, which was this sort of incredibly revered art in Cambodia, completely was pushed aside, completely devalued. And so, you think, oh, this is just a beautiful accessories brand, but actually it's sort of a conduit for this person to get to terms with his home and his past. And so, I think that's kind of amazing.
That is an amazing story, and it makes you appreciate the history and the work that and the kind of labor of love that goes into making everything. Okay, we're going to take a quick break, Aisha, but let's come back as there's so many more things I'd like to talk to you about, particularly what it was like setting up the Dia Guild during the pandemic. Let's come back and talk a little bit about that. We'll be back with more on The Future's Female. Stay tuned. Hi folks, welcome back to The Future's Female. I'm speaking today to Aisha Hassan. She's one of the co-founders of Dia Guild, which is a curated platform that's really championing artisanship from Southeast Asia and hoping to develop the global recognition that it deserves. Aisha, I understand that you and Kylie and Alia set up Dia Guild, I think smack during, right in the middle of the pandemic. Was it November 2020 when you launched it officially? Why did you decide to launch it during a global pandemic? And what were some of the challenges that you guys faced?
Sure. So to your first point about why we decided to start it during the pandemic, I think the pandemic was really a time when everyone was reevaluating what they wanted to do with their lives and their time. And so when we found this shared passion, it made sense that we wanted to pursue it. But the more pressing reason is also that the pandemic forced a lot of these small businesses and artisans further to the fringe. And these were businesses who were already struggling to compete against big labels and fast fashion. And now all of a sudden they had to digitize or go bust, right? So we thought, it's really urgent. We need to create this sort of digital storefront for these brands. So that's kind of why there was a sense of urgency to it, and we kind of just really got the ball rolling. But there were definitely many challenges.
I can imagine, particularly, I mean, I'm thinking about logistics and supply chain and trying to get, I guess, the product, right? So you're working with artisans from, as I understand it, 6 countries within Southeast Asia. What was that? I mean, were there interruptions? Because you guys ship globally, but when supply chains are down, when all the ports were closed, was that a problem, an issue trying to fulfill customers' orders?
Yeah, so I think we're lucky in that fulfilling orders was fairly fairly stress-free. But you are right in that we have a pretty fragmented supply chain. In November, we only started with 7 partner brands, but as the pandemic went on and we grew, we do now have just under 30 brands from 6 different countries. I think one of the big challenges with logistics is, you know, costs and shipping tariffs and all these sorts of things was a sector of knowledge that Alia, Kylie, and I had to completely teach ourselves. and
Right.
we're really lucky that we work with some local logistics providers, so they really helped out. But even things like keeping your inventory, quality control, especially when you're like us dealing with items that are either completely one of a kind or made from natural materials or handmade, figuring out how to get them all to one place, how to market them, how to store them, how to make it a seamless experience on our website. That was definitely one of the big issues that we faced. And shipping costs is expensive. We ship worldwide. We'll ship all the
Right.
way to, Texas. Well, we have had orders from Texas, and trying to work that out while making the business side of things make sense has been hard.
And when you said you've added to your roster of artisans. You've got what, 30 now, if I'm not mistaken. It's growing. How do you find them? Because I can imagine maybe at the start, you're kind of curating it. You're looking for artisans personally, but as you scale, as you want to grow your relationship with many artisans, how are you kind of courting and look and finding them?
Yeah, I mean, it's actually similar to how we started. So when we started, our founding brands were people that we had either bought from before, or they were artisans that we had reached out to completely cold and interviewed for our market research. So there are people such as Neil Philippe, for example, who is one of our designers from the Philippines. He's amazing. He's been there since the very beginning, on
Is he the one featured in Crazy Rich Asians?
That's right. So he makes the most exquisite minaudières, and they're featured in the book, but also in the film. You see Astrid carrying them, and we actually retail those bags on our website. Yeah, so he's amazing.
Oh,
So
yeah,
yeah,
that's wonderful. And so, how would you find new people? Is that just by word of mouth, the artisan network?
yeah, it's actually a combination of both. So a lot of our existing partners have sort of spread the word with other artisans in their community or other designers they know. So in the Philippines, for example, that's how we've met a lot of our new partners that have come on. Otherwise, it's actually through a combination of sort of social media, or we're out somewhere and we see an item and we think, wow, that's gorgeous. But kind of wonderfully today, we actually have a lot of brands reaching out to us. Um, and that's been the case, I suppose, for much of the last year now. Brands have been DMing us or emailing us and saying, hey, can I be part of DIA? And then we begin sort of the vetting and onboarding process. So that's kind of amazing.
That's really wonderful and very encouraging to hear. You mentioned a little bit earlier about your inventory, right? And you mentioned that it's often one of a kind items. And it got me thinking about the value of artisanal work, and the cost and the price tag. And in the age of kind of mass production and fast fashion, where customers or consumers have been taught to expect a very low price point. We can expect cheap things. So when you're thinking about the price point or the value, the price tag of artisanal work, how do you talk to or how do you educate consumers about that? There's always this kind of incessant push to produce more, to be kind of economically scalable for the artisans, but also on the demand side, let's make it cheaper. Why is it so expensive? How do you respond to that kind of mentality, that mindset?
That's a mentality that we faced a lot. As you said, it's this constant tension between needing to fairly compensate people, but this consumer culture that we've become normalized to, which is more and cheaper is better, right? So one of the main things that we do to try and educate consumers is we try to be as transparent as possible about the actual craftsmanship that it took to make this product. You mentioned our one of our kind items. Some of our bags or baskets or scarves, I mean, they can take weeks to weave by hand alone, and that's information that we try to convey. We also convey, like, look, this is not cheap material. This is pure silk that was then hand painted, right? And, another challenge we faced is that this is much more of a prevalent issue with our Asian consumers, actually, versus our consumers from the global West, because there is a consumer bias here that why should I pay a higher price tags for things that were made here when I can buy these brand names? And so that's been really tough as well. But what we try to convey again and again is that this is real craftsmanship at work. These are not people who are mass producing. This is someone who learned weaving from her mother at 8 years old and is trying to make a fair living. And we're working with brands who prioritize that fair living. And so the price you pay is sort of proportionate to the beauty of the real investment item that you're going to get. So education really is just about being transparent about different stages in the production process, I think.
You mentioned a bit earlier that you're noticing a shift in consumer culture. That during this pandemic, this is why you set up the business during the pandemic. That we're starting to become more mindful about our consumer power. Can you tell us a little bit about that? I mean, what have you noticed?
Sure. So I think one of the encouraging things we noticed that made us realize, Dia is a viable business idea is that there is a shift towards conscious consumption, right? Sustainable fashion has become a buzzword. And along with that, people are becoming more educated about greenwashing. Um, and people are realizing that you can't really ignore the true cost of fashion anymore, whether that's environmental, whether that's in terms of poor worker compensation, whether that's in terms of eroding craft legacies. And we see that a lot in social media. So that's kind of one way that we've seen it. You obviously have your traditional press and people writing, incredible perspectives and opinions on it, but really it's coming from the consumer themselves. Because of the power that we wield now in our phones, we can hold brands accountable. People are stepping up to hold brands accountable. When the pandemic happened and these huge corporations weren't paying their workers in the global south, it was the masses on the internet who are calling them out. So we kind of realized that people are making a stand and they're realizing that their purchasing choices are really a choice and expression that they say about themselves. It's a form of cultural capital, right? It's about how you live your life. And through seeing that, reflected online and amazingly in our network of friends, we realized, okay, a change is coming and we want to be part of that change.
Well, I'm so glad that everything you're saying is resonating with me, because I personally have also been trying to educate myself a little bit more about the real cost of fashion, particularly fast fashion. So everything you're saying sounds really wonderful to me. But for those of us out there who want to become more conscious in our purchases, what do you think, Aisha, we should be asking ourselves? What can consumers do to become more conscious when we're buying something? The next time we're thinking about purchasing something, what would you say we should kind of stop and consider before paying?
Yeah, so I think there are a few things. I think first and foremost is really, do I really want this item and am I really going to keep it, right? We're trying to encourage a buy better mentality. So, ideally you'd be buying things to keep for a long period of time as an investment piece or to pass on. And secondly, I'd say ask yourself, where is this item coming from? And by that, I mean, who is the brand? Who is the company? What are the values that they stand by? Do I resonate with the story of this brand or artisan? Do I see myself, if they were a person, would I still be wanting to hang out with them? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
A lot of these huge corporations, and I'm not going to name names, but they really try to humanize themselves. But if you think about it, you don't actually know like who are the real people behind them. So, it's kind of asking what's the story behind it. And then I think on a more personal level with the item, this goes back to what we were talking about earlier, where purchases have become emotionless. I'd say just really ask yourself, is there a meaning here that really resonates with me or the person who I'm buying it for or whatever? And that might be to do with a particular motif or the person who created it or the craft, right? For people overseas, they buy stuff from Dia because it's a lifeline to home. You've emigrated to London, but you get to buy this batik pario that reminds you of a sunny day in your hometown, Or here, for example, we have a brand, Tali Studio. Her brand is based on memory. Maybe I'd buy this earring because I want to create more memories with someone that I'm buying it for. So I think there are a lot of layers of thought. I think being thoughtful is really the word when we shop. And I think all of that adds up to becoming more conscious.
Wonderful. Aisha, thank you so much for speaking with me today. It's been such a pleasure learning about Dia. It's a wonderful cause that you're championing. Appreciate your time. That was my conversation with Aisha Hassan. She's one of the co-founders of Dia Guild. I'm Melisa Idris, and I will be back with you same time next week for another episode of The Future's Female. Thank you so much for watching, and good night.